Welcome. I'm James Lawler from Climate Now, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by Roger Aines from Lawrence Livermore National Lab and Amory Lovins, who is founder and chairman emeritus of RMI, formerly the Rocky Mountain Institute. We are joined in the room today by a live in-person group of staff scientists and others from the Lawrence Livermore National Lab, which is a Department of Energy laboratory focused on science and research in the national interest. So the topic of conversation today is the energy efficiency resource. The idea is that energy efficiency can itself be considered a source of energy, in the sense that as we think about future energy demand, we should consider that some portion of that demand will be offset or met, if you like, by improvements in engineering, such that less energy is required. We're going to delve into exactly how big that energy efficiency resource might be and how we can access it. Roger, I'd love to start with you. Sometimes historical reference can provide some perspective. So I wonder if you might be able to describe for us the global energy demand curve over the last, say, 50 years. How much energy has the world required over that period of time? And what does the shape of that curve look like?
Well, I'll try not to throw a bunch of complicated units in here and just say that over that 50 years, our energy use has increased about 60%, something like that, round numbers. And that growth has been actually remarkably slower than any of the other metrics you might use, population, GDP. And so what we're seeing is that we're using energy more and more efficiently, which is, of course, the topic here.
And what is that curve projected to look like moving forward? Is the degree to which we are using and saving energy thought to be sort of similar to how we've managed to save over time in the past, or not?
I think that's very much an open question. And that one's in our hands to change. I think the trend has been to get more and more efficient. And I would point to what we've done in California, which is every year for the last 30 years or so, we've gotten more and more efficient. And so we use less energy per person, less per GDP. The overall demands in the world, though, are increasing as more of the world achieves the same standard of living that we have here. So we have to balance those two things. And the struggle is how fast can we replace old technologies with new ones that are more efficient.
Mm-hmm. So I want to come back to that, but Roger, I'd like to ask you sort of a question that would maybe help us understand why we're even talking about this, because if we think about renewables, solar, wind, et cetera, these don't release any emissions. They're emissions free, carbon neutral. So why do we even care about efficiency in the first place?
This is a thing that happens as we think about decarbonizing, and everyone wants to use renewable energy to decarbonize. It's a very straightforward thing, and I'm frankly glad that legislators and policymakers understand that concept. But the amount of renewable energy that is available to the world is fundamentally limited by things like land use. And we have already seen that right here in our community in Livermore. There's a big debate over solar power that is going to use land that is currently in agricultural use. And that kind of thing is going to put limits on how much renewable energy we can build. And it should put limits on it. I mean, that we should live in the world that we want to live in, not one that's covered by solar panels or, other things. And so the benefit of efficiency here is that it basically reduces the amount of those new resources that we have to build and put in place. And those new resources are just fundamentally more land use intensive than the things that we have today. So we always have to keep in mind using them efficiently.
And what are some of the other reasons that we might care about efficiency beyond land use?
Well, I'll just start with the amount of money that's at hand. That there's an enormous amount of change that's required in order to have a clean climate. And we need to figure out where we're going to spend that money and how much bang we're going to get for the buck. And, unfortunately, we don't get to make those choices from a global perspective. The the IPCC doesn't decide how the world's going to spend money. But we do have to make those, as scientists and technologists, we have to make those options tractable to businesses and individuals and cities, and people are going to actually buy these things. And efficiency always looks good when you can get it down to the actual buyer. Buyers like efficiency. You go around our city here and you're going to find all the street lamps are LEDs and all the street lights, the traffic lights are all LED based. Why is that? Saves a lot of electricity. So I think one of the big challenges for us is to get that message out to people.
Amory, do you have anything to add to that?
I think another important dimension here is that efficient energy use typically gives you not just the same service, but a better quality of service. An efficient house is more comfortable, more healthful, more pleasant to be in. An efficient office where you can see what you're doing because of good lighting design, hear yourself think, because there's no mechanical noise, let in daylight that's good for your physiology, is going to make you about 6 to 16% more productive, which is extraordinarily important for the economics of the business. An efficient car will take you longer on fewer batteries, which means mining less battery material. An efficient factory will produce higher quality, more reliably, more consistently. Every use in every sector, there's a case like this that the service quality improves, and many people actually care even more about that than about saving money. And James, we have a question or comment from down the table here.
Joe Zod from Photon Sciences. In addition to finances, comfort, and on-demand issues, I think the increase in efficiency also adds the component of security. The hub and spoke delivery system for energy has numerous well-written vulnerabilities, and as you increase efficiencies, you can move away from that hub and spoke on-demand delivery to on-site delivery and get away from the system vulnerabilities that, for example, the U.S. grid has today.
That's a very important point. 98 or 99% of power failures in the U.S. start in the grid. So if your solar power is on your roof, there's no grid between it and the that you're running. And that means your reliability goes up by maybe 100-fold. That means in turn that efficiency becomes even more important because it lets you fit a more affordable and fittable on your roof solar rig that you can build easier, faster. You don't need to finance it perhaps because you can afford just to buy it. And it's enough because you're using the electricity very efficiently.
Because most people don't think of it that way. I think most people think of efficiency as something that gets more and more expensive, the more you do of it. And as you do that, you're making little tweaks to whatever device you're creating or whatever structure you're building, and it's harder and harder to do. But Amory, I think you have a very interesting framework or a phrase that captures sort of the concept, and you've described it to me as tunneling through the cost barrier, which I think is such a great way to frame it, and maybe might make people think about efficiency in a brand new light. Can you describe that concept?
So I live in a very cold place. It used to go below -40 pretty reliably every December, and I'm way up in the Rocky Mountains near Aspen. But my house doesn't do any combustion. It has no heating system. Why? Because it's super insulated. Very thick insulation in the walls and roof, and windows that insulate like 16 or even 22 sheets of glass. Look like 2, cost less than 3. How could I afford all that stuff? Well, it got rid of the heating system. Now, if you look at the cost of saving the next unit of energy versus how much you save, as you save more by adding insulation, it gets more and more expensive because each bit of insulation you add leaves less energy to be saved by the next unit of insulation. And normally you get to the point where if you added more insulation, it wouldn't save enough energy to pay for itself. So you stop. Well, we went to about 3 times that level until We also got rid of the furnace, ducts, fans, pipe, pumps, wires, controls, fuel supply arrangements, and therefore the cost of the heating system went to zero. And therefore, the cost of the whole building actually went down by about $1,100. So why should we get there the long way around to save 99% of the space heating energy at a cost of minus $1,100 when we could just tunnel through the cost barrier, go straight there by asking up front, is there a sensible way to design this building so it doesn't need heating? And you could do the same with cooling. Even in steamy tropics, it works fine. So by designing the building or vehicle or factory as a whole system for many benefits, you get to that destination of shrinking or even eliminating heating, cooling, and other supply systems, and using that avoided construction cost to pay for the efficiency that got rid of that stuff. So the whole system design, we call integrative design, is the key to making energy efficiency as a resource several times bigger than we thought it could be, and yet at lower cost and often with increasing returns.
I think people are often surprised by the power of efficiency and integrative design, and it kind of sneaks up on you, and suddenly it's achieved this phenomenal result. And there's a very interesting example, I think, from near the beginning, Amory, of your career, when you were saying you were raising the flag of efficiency and the power of it, and you were roundly criticized and derided for doing so. And I would love for you to tell that story, if you would, of what you were saying in your paper in Foreign Affairs in 1976, and why that rubbed so many people the wrong way. Let's start there, and then I want to get to how the world actually turned out.
In 1975, an idea took shape on a Shell group planning blackboard in London that turned into a couple of graphs for how the energy system, say in the United States, could evolve over the next half century. One in which we think the problem is where to get more energy, more of any kind from any source at any price. The curves always go up towards the upper right. And another in which we start by asking, what are we trying to do with the energy? We don't just want lumps of coal and raw kilowatt hours and barrels of sticky black goo. We're trying to get services like hot showers, cold beer, baked bread, smelted aluminum, mobility, comfort. And for each of those, let's ask how much energy, of what kind or quality, from what source, at what scale, would do the job in the cheapest way. That came to be called the end use, least cost approach. And it turned out to give much better foresight. So these two views, which I call the hard and soft energy paths, got into quite a tangle, because when I laid out that view of the world, it was very threatening to the supply industries. I was kind of invading the perimeter of their belief system and running around inside, showing that according to their numbers and their methods, what they wanted to do would cost more and work worse than what I was suggesting. So there was a huge debate. There's a yay thick congressional hearing record and thousands of pages of fine print. Anyway, by the end of a year or so, the critics were not doing very well because I'd done my homework. And the chief economist of Atlantic Richfield kind of brought that phase to a close by saying, well, I, for one, don't care if Lovins is only half right. That would be better performance than I've seen from the rest of them. And then the companies that had been our severest critics started hiring us to help them do what they were starting to realize could make sense and make a lot of money. And it turned out that soft energy path, although it was not meant as a forecast, was within 1% or so of how energy demand actually turned out by 2000. It was the only accurate forecast, non-forecast, but vision in the literature. And the folks that forecast demand 50 or 100% higher, that's everybody else, they were using sophisticated computer models, the best forecasting tools of the time, but they were really steering by looking in the rearview mirror, not through the windshield.
And so, Amory, to what degree are we in the same boat today as we were then? Is buying more energy efficiency today, is that something that we should be doing a lot more of? Is there a lot more potential for that than we're giving sort of credit for than the models suggest, for example?
The efficiency potential is now much bigger than it used to be. Efficiency is not a depletable resource like an oil reservoir or a copper ore body, a collection of atoms. The barriers to realizing how big efficiency are really between our ears. We think of efficiency often as binary. Is your house efficient or not? Like, does your house have a garage or not? It's not like that. It's a continuous spectrum, and your house can get more and more efficient until actually it uses less energy than it produces, so-called net positive building that are now becoming common. So I think there are a lot of conceptual barriers that come from an older era of resource use that are really getting in the way of using our energy resources as productively as we should.
Can you just expand on that? What is the old mindset when it comes to use of resources?
The old mindset is you dig up a resource and burn it or heat, beat, and treat it into making something. But many of our resources now are ideas. Like design is about how you fit technologies together in the right proportions and sequence and timing to get the result you want. I'll give you a simple example. Over half the world's electricity runs motors. Half their power runs pumps and fans that move liquids or gases through pipes and ducts. If you make the pipes and ducts fat, short, and straight, instead of skinny, long, and crooked, the standard method, they have a lot less friction. And you end up saving, if everybody did this, about a fifth of the world's electricity, or half the coal-fired electricity. You get your money back in under a year fixing old stuff, or instantly in building new stuff. So why isn't this approach of minimizing friction and moving fluids around in any standard engineering textbook or government study or industry forecast or climate model? Well, because it's not a technology. Design is a process of translating intention into artifact or effect. And it's definitely not a widget or a device or a gadget. It's how you do something.
Once you start to improve efficiency of elements of a system, you see these cascading sort of accelerating benefits more broadly in the system. So if you have a certain part of, let's say, a car, and if one part of a system becomes more efficient, how does that improve maybe other parts of the system or allow you to use less materials?
Most of the energy needed to move a car is caused by its weight. I happen to drive a car made of very lightweight carbon fiber, which was supposedly too expensive to make a car out of unless it's a handmade Formula One race car costing $1 million. But it turns out that this car, which 250,000 have been sold, is very popular and sells at a competitive price. Why? Well, first of all, because you pay for the carbon fiber by needing fewer batteries to move less weight around. The batteries are the costliest part of the car, but also making the car gets radically simpler. It takes a third the normal amount of capital and water. It takes half the usual amount of energy, space, and time. Together, those benefits pay for the carbon fiber, making the ultralighting free. But unless you looked at the whole car, you wouldn't realize that. And indeed, most people in the car business still think of cost per pound, not cost per car, which is the way you buy the car. You don't care if some of it costs more per pound, if that makes other parts of it smaller, cheaper, or disappear. And indeed, when you start making the car very efficient, it takes so little power to move it that you would use a kind of propulsion system that doesn't need, let's see, what do you get rid of? Axles, differentials, clutch, flywheel, transmission, about 8 or 9 things go away, and each of them makes the car lighter. But when you make it lighter, you need less strength to less in the structure, less suspension to support it, less brakes to stop it, and then that in turn makes it lighter. So you go around the spiral some more.
I wonder, Roger, Amory, to what degree do you believe that current models that forecast what's possible with energy improvements in energy efficiency take into account these kind of accelerating, like the potential of these sort of accelerating loops that Amory's describing? Because it seems to me from what you were just saying, Amory, these could be quite powerful dynamics, and have been powerful dynamics. And I just wonder if are we properly thinking about the potential there?
I think it's a real challenge that's driven by the structure of the academic literature, which requires proof and requires, in fact, a hierarchy of proof for any point that you want to make in a major journal. And in many cases, what we're talking about here, the things Ramy and I have been talking about, are just good engineering judgment. You look at them and you go, yeah, that makes sense, we could do that. But you don't have a succession of multiple papers that prove that you could do it. And so there isn't a format really for this kind of good engineering judgment. And I'm not sure how to create one, but I do know that when you see what the IPCC reports for the UN, that is a real restriction on how they're able to talk about things, because if it's not in the peer-reviewed literature, they are not permitted to consider it.
This is George Paredes here, Director of Carbon Management Partnerships for Livermore Lab. I have a question for both Amory and Roger, and I'd like to dwell on a phrase that Amory said a few minutes ago. It's the barriers or the limitations are between our ears.
Okay.
There's no doubt that efficiency has enormous potential. A lot of it is yet to be tapped. At the same time, this phrase, it's between our ears, scares me because humans do not always have good information. They do not always make rational decisions. They may even know that something is cheaper in the long run for them, but because of entrenched views, habits, lack of awareness that there's actually a choice involved, we've actually been much slower in adopting this and tapping into this enormous potential than we should be. So I wanted to ask, given the very significant barriers in tapping into this potential, do we not have an imperative, or would we not be well advised to try and maximize that potential, not just in efficiency, but in all other forms of climate mitigation, including finding ways to reverse the harm and remove CO2 from the atmosphere?
I think one of the really interesting things that has come out of the climate modeling community is this simple measure of net zero, that if we don't get to zero, we won't achieve the climate outcomes we want. And that then engenders a really interesting set of conversations around what can you do to get to zero. And the thing I like about that is it allows everyone to participate. Everybody can say, this is my favorite thing. And I say, good, go and make that happen. But I think that has never been present before. We've never had a measure that we wanted to hit. It was always, we want to do a little better, or we're going to spend a little less. And so now when we say zero is the target, and it's the only acceptable target, in fact, we have to go below zero. Now we can start to measure those things, add them together, and see how many of each we need. And that's something that we've done at the lab here, and we've looked at it and went, oh crap, we need everything, and then we need some more. And so I think that's going to, if we can sort of keep propagating that idea that this zero target is really hard and everybody needs to dig in and do it and add the things that that are most important to them, or that they think they can contribute most. And that's one of the things that Amory brings to this discussion, is he contributes the discussion about how important efficiency is. Well, that's terrific, because that is a major component of net zero.
Yeah, I think everything we can do and need to do has its own set of barriers. And you get to choose only which kinds of barriers you prefer, and how you want to diversify your barrier portfolio so you have a good chance that enough stuff will work. I would, however, caution about the notion that we need to do everything. Engineered carbon removal is one of the things I think deserves a modest amount of research to see if there's some wonderful idea nobody came up with that would make it more practical and affordable than it looks right now. But the more urgent the climate problem is, the more we need to invest in things that are fast, cheap, and proven, rather than things that are slow, costly, and speculative. Because you can only spend $1 on one thing at a time. And if you buy a lot of expensive stuff, you aren't getting as much solution per dollar.
Thanks for that.
Brianna
Maybe we can
Schmidt,
take one last
I'm
question
a
to wrap it
geologist
up.
working on geologic carbon storage and carbon mineralization. So I guess, no pun intended, but what's the most efficient way to deploy efficiency? Like, if you could wave a magic wand, what are the 3 things you would do? Like, should the government buy thousands of heat pumps and distribute them to low-income homes? Are tax incentives the best way to do it? Is it a combination of things? How do we actually unleash all of this potential?
So you're asking about policy tools. Let's see, 3 things. I would desubsidize the entire energy system, so people can see what energy really costs and then decide how much is enough. I would enable, and if I can, require all ways to save or supply energy, compete fairly at honest prices, regardless of their type, technology, size, location, or ownership. That's pretty much the opposite of the system we have now. And I would systematically bust barriers. I would go around hunting for where there is a policy, habit, practice, rule that gets in the way of using energy in a way that saves money, and I would try hard to exterminate it. So that's a different approach, I think, than what most people reach for. Do we use this or that policy instrument to know about, to do a particular thing that we already know about? I'm more getting at the process of how we make better choices.
And I would ask every engineering school in the world to require classes in this, so that people go into the people who are actually making these decisions understand how to do these things. Every trade school should teach people how to install heat pumps. This is a major issue they're going around in England right now. It's like they want to put in a lot of heat pumps. They can't find enough people to do it. So, there's a lot of ways to kind of reach into the system in a kind of insidious, sneaky way and push it forward. And education is always an important one.
Yeah, as always, we're in a race between education and catastrophe.
That was a recording from a live podcast interview at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab with Amory Lovins, co-founder of RMI, and Roger Aines, Energy Program Chief Scientist at Lawrence Livermore National Lab. Now that's it for this episode of the Climate Now podcast. To check out other episodes, watch our videos, or read our systems thinking articles, visit climatenow.com. To get in touch, tweet us at WeAreClimateNow or email us at contact@climatenow.com. We hope you can join us for our next conversation. Climate Now is made possible in part by our science partners like the Livermore Lab Foundation. The Livermore Lab Foundation supports climate research and carbon cleanup initiatives at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab, which is a Department of Energy applied science and research facility. More information on the Foundation's climate work can be found at livermorelabfoundation.org.